The last thing you want to do, especially if you have not generating revenue, is make it a job and prep your show to the cows come home and have all the structure. It's a conversation, not an interrogation. But just know that audiences don't instantly fly. So many podcasts don't make it to episode 8. So always tell yourself, try to make at least challenge for 15 or 20 episodes.
Welcome to the first ever episode of The One Thing You Should Know. I was recently joined by Flobo Boyce, a podcaster, stand-up comic, entertainment network owner, author and esports commentator. He is founder of the podcast network New Amsterdam Entertainment and has made a career combining his passions with business. Flobo let us know the one thing you should know about getting started in podcasting. So if you've ever fancied getting into podcasting at all, stick around and enjoy the show. I'm excited to be joined by our guest today, Flobo Boyce. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, well, thanks so much for the invite. This is a lot of fun.
So, Flobo, your chosen topic today is getting started into podcasting.
Yeah.
But first, we'd like to know a little bit more about your life journey. So tell our listeners about your life journey, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very complex, but I was a Brooklyn kid, born and raised in New York City, which is interesting because you think of Brooklyn as being this giant metropolis, which it is, but for me, it's a small town, right? Because my neighborhood was there, my favorite pizza shop was there, etc. Went down to Florida to get the degree in television broadcasting, moved out to California to get a MFA in film production with editing, and that has always been the entertainment side, mostly from behind the camera. But as technology changes and they become more and more accessible, I'm kind of be able to do both. And now I have a lot more front of camera experience. So I write, I consider myself a writer first, but I also perform things with the microphone, whether in real space, whether digital and all that jazz.
Okay. And how many years would you say you've been in that then?
Wow. Well, the first blogs are about 20 years old. You can imagine that. This face is definitely that's not how old I am. But I would say, as far as like the podcast digital network owner and doing things that are more aligned with this, I would say about 6 or 7 years, really intensely, right before the pandemic. And of course, pandemic kind of broke time. But I would say I'm on the better side of a decade now.
Yeah. Have you read back on any of them old posts? I mean, old blogs at all, or would you not look back at those?
I look back and cringe. It's like macaroni art when you're a kid, like, oh, you thought that was your masterpiece. And you go, oh my goodness. And my mom put this in the refrigerator. Are we kidding me? Like,
yeah. If you don't look back at your first videos or recordings or anything and don't cringe, then.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you decide to get into podcasting then?
That is a very interesting question. So in the 90s, there was a big rash of internet radio, which is, I guess, the precursor to podcasting, where it will be live and you'll have this app or something like that. You will get on your little PC microphone that came in the box and just say, hey, what's going on? Pirate radio, here's a song or two. I did that for a bit. I thought it was kind of fun, but it was always a hobby. But the main podcasting thing happened when I had lost a bunch of weight. Just for background context, I used to weigh at my heaviest 26.9 stone. So I had a podcast called 26 Stone because 27 stone doesn't sound nearly as cool, where I would talk about just like what I did in my journey to lose that weight, but it was still kind of a hobby thing. But I think with podcasting now, the structure, the format, the delivery methods, that really happened in earnest in about 2019. I was self-employed for a couple of years. There's some things I realized I was taking from news items of the day and applying it to my business. And so I wanted to share that. And like I was telling you before we went live, it was just me and my phone. And so it was me and my phone in my car for the best acoustics being like, hey, have you heard about the new Tesla Cybertruck? Let me tell you about it. And it kind of grew from there. And it really was the pandemic where I was seeing other people struggling with their jobs and their backgrounds. And I wanted to ask them how they were making it through this crisis that for some reason, well, for a lot of reasons, we were all experiencing, but in different ways. And that's why I started introducing guests and started having that dialogue on the shows.
Okay, great. And how would you say sort of your past journey and your experiences lends itself to podcasting? How would you say that it helps?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it's made me a better interviewer. I know you can prep your show to the cows come home and have all the structure, but the last thing you want to do is make the person on your show feel like they're being interrogated. And I always say that. Look, it's a conversation, not an interrogation. And I do think that learning different experiences over time will make you well knowledgeable in a lot more subjects than you think you would be when you start out. But definitely being a lot more affable, being just a lot more empathetic to the struggles or desires, or maybe slide in a word when someone forgets what their point is or anything like that. And so understanding the human side of things is why I do it, because you could just basically read an article about a certain subject and get the information, but understanding the delivery source as well makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah, I get that point because I feel like I'm at the start of podcasting as well. So it's great to hear like how you can improve and what you can get better at.
It never goes
especially
away.
with-
You're always starting out. Like
Yeah.
you could be 20 years doing it. You're still starting out.
Yeah, I bet that imposter syndrome always creeps in. Yeah. So yeah, what are the steps that you think they should take to get into podcasting?
Yeah, step one, quit. No, I'm kidding. Don't quit. There are so many podcasts out there. It can be intimidating or overwhelming, right? Here in the United States, I read a stat that there's 400,000 American podcasts alone when it comes to the global outreach of things. And so I tell people there's only two kinds of podcasts out there that kind of make any kind of traction. And that is one, podcast hosted by celebrities. And if you're famous, great. You're already in the game. And two, a podcast with a unique format. And so I understand there should be some room to have a canvas, do whatever you want, right? I get that. If you want to have a podcast for your friends, that's okay. Or a podcast for your local neighborhood, that's great. But if you want to talk about growth or you want to share it on a global platform, you need to hammer down your format. Now, when I say format, I'm not saying have it so rigid where you're like, okay, not time for questions now, it's time for my next segment. Like that becomes really weird. But understanding what's the show about, how long is the show, try to repeat the same kind of runtime, try to repeat the same kind of tone of your guests, understanding the beginning, middle, and end, those things will make people coming back. And I always say, compare yourself to your favorite fast food restaurant. Yeah, you may have a favorite shop or a favorite location, but a burger will taste the same no matter what outlet you go to, because people know what they're getting when they walk into your shop. I know what a Big Mac tastes like from Des Moines to Duluth to Dudley, right? It's the same taste, and that totally matters for your show. So format is super important. Try to make sure you have a structured schedule and avoid pod fading. And what that is you start a podcast, you do a hot 4 or 5 episodes, and then you do the whole, hey guys, I haven't been here for a while, here's episode number 6, and then my episode number 7. It's kind of a dead thing. So many podcasts don't make it to episode 8. So always tell yourself, try to make at least challenge for 15 or 20 episodes. It doesn't have to be weekly, it doesn't have to be daily, but know that if you really want it to grow, you have to be consistent on that level. And if you have to take a break, I mean, real life happens, you're not a slave to it. Just say to your listeners, hey, I'm going on vacation in 2 months. Episode 7, episode 10, episode 100 is coming in 2 months or whatever.
Yeah, and how you said that quite a lot of podcasts drop off at episode 8. What things would you recommend to get you past that 8th episode?
I've come across that either you're bored with your own format, which means, hey, look, try out some tweaks or some new segments or some new ideas, or you're having a tough time getting guests. And for that, I said, I'd rather you take the break and then stack episodes and then release them over time. One of the cool things about what we do now is that with editing tools, you can record anyone, anywhere, anytime. You can take out time references, you can leave that in. So you're not necessarily on a live show, like if you were on a Saturday Night's Takeaway where it's like, we're going live, you know? So you can really take that time to really make it work for you. It's not about pumping out the content as much as you can. It's about doing it that's consistent and it's helpful to whatever your audience think they would find to be helpful. If it's you saying, look, it's helpful for me just to hear these stories, then maybe it doesn't have to be weekly. It could be bi-weekly. It could be a monthly show. If it's, hey, I want to talk about the news on this particular time, if I have a weekly news show and that's my podcast and you realize, hey, it's becoming too much, well, maybe you can shift your focus and say, hey, this is the news of the month, or maybe make the show shorter. You can always tweak things to make it more manageable for you, because the last thing you want to do, especially if you have not generating revenue, is make it a job where you don't really figure out what your show is going to be quite about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you said as well around, there is so many different podcasts out there, loads of people trying to do it on loads of different topics and loads of people speaking about the same things as well.
Yeah.
How would you say, from your perspective, when you are getting started, how would you say, what's the best way to stand out?
Yeah,
Across all of those?
it helps to have a good design idea. Like, I'm not saying a podcast thumbnail will save your show.
Yeah.
but definitely you have the place to experiment. My show, New Amsterdam Radio, not to plug, started off very, very, very common. It was like, I just want to talk with creatives and see how they were dealing with the pandemic and what they were doing for their businesses, because on Instagram, I felt like people were either thinking about doing the jump to whatever they want to do, or they were already made the jump or at the top of the mountain and we're telling people how to live their lives. If you're not up at 4:00 in the morning eating 6 eggs, you're not hustling, bro. And I was like, okay, let's think about the people in the middle. And that was kind of what it was. That was a brainstorming session of, let's say, about people who just started their business a year, 2 years ago, and let's ask them about their failures. The fact the show is called New Amsterdam, people ask me why, is because there was supposed to be a stationery brand called New Amsterdam that failed. No one bought them. No one bought them. I ran out of budget for marketing and said, let me take my failure and to make it a thing. And so I do think there's some time and some self-inspection and go, hey, look, why is this interesting to me alone? And then make your show to that, because it is a platform for you as well. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel either. You don't have to say, well, I got a podcast, so I got to add some bells and whistles, maybe a fireworks display in the middle of it. You don't want to put yourself into that much of a gimmick. So when someone asks me, what's my show about? I ask people their why, like most shows, and their how, tactics, apps they use, that sort of thing. And that's kind of been my formula mixed with my personality. That's my format.
And what do you see? Obviously, you're deep into and getting started into podcasting. What would you, what do you think the future of podcasting looks like?
That is a very interesting question, because, if you asked me that question 5 years ago, I was going to say, oh man, it's going to be the great contraction, right? There are just so many podcasts out there and maybe not a lot of audiences there. But what happened was the world shut down. We all got inside, and then our concept of entertainment has shifted. And the reason why I was saying contraction is because there was a time where everyone wanted to have the best looking thing. And it still kind of is there, but it's like the best cameras, the best audio equipment, the best backdrop. People were doing podcasts on rooftops and in luxury spas and stuff. And the pandemic really gave us a big reset. And for the first time ever, almost going back to the start of it, Joe Schmoes like you and I, assuming you're a schmo, I'm totally a schmo, we're on the same plane of networks, because it happened so fast. Like Sky Sports had a couple guys in their basement with their cell phones like I did. And I did think that was a new explosion, a new kind of thing. And I think it was an appreciation for niches.
If you're a podcaster, it can sometimes be a bit difficult to find guests. Equally, if you're a guest looking for podcasts to appear on, it's not always easy to find them. Thankfully, our sister company, MatchMaker.fm, has an app to do just that. With over 70,000 users, MatchMaker FM is the best place to find, contact, and collaborate with like-minded creatives. Cut out all the time wasters and build a community of world-class content creators. And the best part, you can sign up today for free. So head over to MatchMaker.fm to get started.
This podcast is called The One Thing You Should Know, and you're on here to speak about the one thing you should know about getting into podcasting. So what would you say the one thing we should know as listeners about getting into podcasting?
Everyone has an idea of doing a podcast. Everyone had that like a great American novel that comes across in their mind. I think the fact that you're even attempting it puts you ahead of the curve. But just know that audiences don't instantly flock. It may take you 6 months. It may take you 5 years. It may take you just a random episode with a random guest. But as long as you're doing it and you love doing it and you're okay with small growth, 1 listener becoming 5 listeners, 5 listeners become 6 listeners, you'll get there eventually.
And that's the end of today's episode. I just want to say a big thank you to Flobo Boyce and his insights into getting started in podcasting. If you like the podcast, why not share with a friend and subscribe so you never miss the one thing you should know.